Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this session on product launch readiness, really focused on user testing and sales enablement. I am super excited to be joined by two really great people, but super rock stars in their role as well. Why don't we take a quick second to introduce ourselves? Fiona, maybe you can kick us off. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to right now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited. So my name is Fiona. I'm a product marketer for a company called Air, which is a creative operations platform that helps teams collect, approve, and share content. Our visual workspace was built for teams to manage their creative assets and products in one place. So yeah, we like to say it's like Google Drive or Dropbox on steroids.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Chris, how are you?
Good, Jorge. And I'm Chris Rader. I am the head of marketing over at Centercode. At my heart, I'm still a product manager. I'm just doing marketing. Centercode is a tool for managing user testing. So we recruit, collect feedback, push that to other systems. We visually display it, engage with testers, all kinds of great stuff for product teams, engineering teams. Specifically, we're in this topic talking about sales enablement and how you can use some of that data to help out with your launch. So I'm really excited to be back here talking to Jorge. I know he talked to Luke Frailer, our CEO, on his podcast, which was really a cool topic. So glad to be here, Jorge.
Awesome. Well, it's interesting. I've heard this a couple times, which is the product launches that get marketers involved. Let's say, like, Fiona, you're a product marketer, specifically, but let's say you're an organization that doesn't have the product marketer, role yet. Getting marketing involved early, right, in that product development process, right, and not just having product managers focusing on like all the launch messaging and stuff like that seems to really kind of create a more aligned environment and a better end result. So Chris, your background as a PM makes a lot of sense now to like then move over to the marketing side. So that alignment is super huge. Speaking of alignment, in terms of sort of like that pre-launch user testing and research, Chris, how does marketing slash product marketing work with product, customer success, and so on to collect that research from users needed to really help develop that positioning and then also packaging for, let's say, this new product or feature in terms of the launch context?
Yeah. What's interesting is you bring up that friction, right? So there's good healthy friction, and then there's friction that just kind of gets in the way. So when you talk about like bringing in marketing people into research and development, there's kind of like this old saying of too many cooks in the kitchen. Like there's this fear that marketing is going to start influencing some of that product development or counteracting some of that research, and really that's like kind of an old stigma that we kind of need to get rid of. We do need collaboration at the right time, so figuring out that right time to include a product marketing person or a marketing team, because we don't have a product marketer. I was the product marketer at Centercode. So a lot of it is making sure you include them at the right moments to get them the information that they can use to be better at their job. So in product marketing, we have to use some of this data to help position our product. Because if we don't use some of what users are saying early on, it could fall flat. Like we can just come up with some kind of marketing messaging that's like, we do this better and faster and stronger than all those other products out there, and it's just kind of boring. But when we can get some of that actual insights from our users, we can help position that feature or this product that we're launching just a little bit better with using this generated content from some of our users before launch. So that's kind of how I've always seen how we can get a better job at positioning our product, is by using some of that data, but we need to break those barriers down, right?
Yeah.
Of how we can get involved.
Well, Fiona, like, Chris mentioned, you said a statement like there's this fear that marketing is going to influence the way that or even the features. I think you said the product as a whole. Shouldn't it? Like in a way, right? Like like, you as a marketer, you should have a pulse on what the market is talking about, and then be able to deliver that to product, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that something that you both have already touched on is at the very earliest stage, having marketing or product marketing involved can be super helpful for the outcome of the launch, because it gives us marketers a really in-depth understanding of the value that this feature is bringing to the product, or the end user. And collaborating at the early research stage really helps that. It helps set a common understanding and set the table so that everyone's on the same page going into the launch and starting to pull together some of that messaging. I like to say, like, the most successful product marketers become partners with product and not order takers, because with marketing comes in too late, you can kind of fall into that dynamic. So the earlier we get involved, and even just listening in, not necessarily, driving some of the decisions that product should be in charge of, but just listening can be really profound and impactful.
In terms of the how, there are, a bunch of sort of approaches that we can take to this research, focus groups and surveys and qualitative, quantitative research, et cetera. How do you start to kind of decide who does that? Because I know in some cases, product managers could do that kind of work. But then, in my opinion, that's something that the product marketer should really do. How do you sort of decide who works with, or yeah, who works with who, and who focuses on what?
Yeah, I tend to take the approach of anything like positioning or messaging related, I'll own. But if it's really like diving into the feature, demoing it, then product will run that. So during customer research calls, we typically have our PMs drive the sessions, demo the features, gather feedback, and I'll jump in and ask questions about messaging or positioning, or like, try and pry a little bit to start learning. But sometimes, like I mentioned, listening. Sometimes I'll just listen in and get enough from those sessions, by tuning into the specific words that the customers use, or observing moments of hesitation versus moments of excitement, can tell me a lot about how if we're talking about the feature, if it's resonating, or tuning into the words that they're using and taking those and like helping them develop messaging or fine tune our messaging that already exists.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like you get that perspective, right? So you're looking at it through the lens of how am I going to use this research to influence how I'm going to do my job, right? So what are we going to use in this on what they're saying? How can I use it in messaging? Where the product manager might be looking and saying, how am I going to use this to tweak this feature? How am I going to use this to steer my engineering or UX team in the right direction?
Mm.
And that's why that involvement's so important, because everyone has their own lens. An engineering team would look at that, some of this data with, I need to fix this bug, right? I need to make sure that works or performs well. The UX team, how do I get this design right? Including marketing there is going to get them to be able to attach their lens to it and say, how can I use this data? And then in that sense, everyone's maximizing how much they get from a single study. So we don't have to run, 20 different studies across this entire life cycle and spend a bunch of money and spend a bunch of time trying to get this. We can get more people involved, and they can, kind of use the data as it comes to them.
And who's recruiting folks to these research sessions? Is this something that the PM or the PMM, or do they come together and say, "Hey, we have these relationships with existing customers," uh, and then sort of, bring people to these efforts?
From my perspective, I see it all shapes and sizes, right? Like some people have formal research teams that will do all the recruiting, right? We have teams at Centercode. We have a full recruitment team that just handles recruitments for our beta tests. But product management have good relationships with users, and so do sales, right? Sales has great relationships with a lot of customers, and a lot of times it really depends on the situation of who's going to do some of the recruiting. For a lot of B2B SaaS, I like to include the account executives, or sorry, not account executives, account managers, saying like, who would be a good fit for this? You've talked to them probably more frequently, and they have more of a regular cadence to talking to them. Whereas a product manager like may chime in every once in a while looking for some research, but so that's the way I've typically dealt with it.
Yeah. Similarly, I think our product managers definitely typically have a strong understanding of who might be, a strong participant in a beta, for example. But it can also be really helpful to leverage customer success's
Mm.
close relationships with customers, because they can, not only do customers come to mind to reach out to, but they might have a better understanding of uh, who is willing to say yes, who, you know, is a prime candidate for the specific feature, who's been asking for it. So customer success is always on my list, like first stop to go to. And then between, like I mentioned, the product managers and myself, we can kind of pull together a pretty solid list typically.
And Fiona, are there ever any instances where maybe you're going outside of just your customer base and maybe looking at personas to give another perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes we, um, for example, like our ICP is creatives, so we'll look to talk to a lot of creative directors, and we've been really successful with just reaching out to creative directors on LinkedIn and picking their brains. We've been actually spotlighting them in a series on our blog, just to get more content out there about creatives themselves, but also it helps us learn a lot about their creative processes and how we
Yeah.
can bring that into our product. And it can start some really great conversations that we can then, and it's truly not, you know, a sales angle at all. It's really just to start learning about our target audience. So we've had a lot of success with that so far.
It's
Awesome,
definitely like
Chris.
that's a good. I love that approach. Like the personal approach to trying to build a connection with someone that's in your market is super helpful. From like I've the last couple of months, I've been really hard into this. I could put out something that says, "Hey, I want to find a bunch of people for a study." Right? Like I can say, I want to get a survey out there. I want to get an interview. Maybe I want to run a beta test, and I can go put out a LinkedIn post, a Twitter post. I can go put an ad out there if I wanted to, and I'm not going to get nearly the success if I were to reach out to 10 people personally and saying, "Hey, I'm really looking for your perspective and your insights." And it's every time I've done that, it I nail it, right? It's so much people are willing to build those connections because they want to connect with other people, especially like with the whole pandemic hitting. Like I think people are a little more open to like talking, uh, definitely virtually.
Yeah.
So that's something I've kind of observed.
Well, you have helped us specifically here at Asset Mule. We've sort of followed that process, right? Fiona and Chris, joining our design partner program and giving us that insight, right? And we're pre official launch at the moment, and so we've really been able to take that approach. We haven't ran ads or any of that kind of stuff. We've literally had a little under 300 conversations in the last 8 months or so, um, with, well, I'm going to even say 4 months because it's the business is about that 8 months. So we just started with this very specific researcher. So a couple months ago, but almost 300, right, conversations that we've had, and we've done it in that fashion, just that personal, outreach, and with the intention of getting these insights to be able to launch properly, but also understand what it is that we're truly solving for folks out there. So that resonates pretty deeply with me.
Definitely.
In terms of messaging, Fiona, and you think about kind of like a framework that you've used. So let's just assume you've done a lot of research, you've had done ton of data that has come in, whether that's from the research you've done or third party research, or maybe other stakeholders within the organization that's passed that information to you. Let's say, for example, the product manager. Do you have any best practices for developing that initial messaging that you would use for the, let's call it, the official launch?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, with the goal of really understanding our audience and speaking their language through our messaging. Once we've done the research, like you said, the work then begins to really try and clearly articulate the unique value that this new feature or product is bringing to our customers. So I usually start by identifying the problems that it solves, and really working to describe how it's solving those problems. And I like to support that with proof points. For example, if your benefit is we have great customer service, go a level deeper by saying like we've won 20 service excellence awards. I try to like leverage the data that we've pulled in that initial research phase to put hard numbers into our messaging where we can, to just keep it really simple and clear and concise. Something else that we started doing, and it's great if you have the resources to, but leverage copywriters for some really like bigger, important launches. Not only do they have the talent to take your messaging to the next level, but it can be super helpful to have an outsider kind of translate, make sure you don't have that like that language, that internal language that you can get so comfortable using, making that doesn't quite hit with outside audiences. I always like to have an outsider come in for that reason as well. And then always like to, of course, make sure that our messaging is aligning with our brand, keeping it concise and consistent across platforms. And then iterating and testing as much as possible where we can, to make sure that it's resonating, to make sure that you're not going into launch with any sort of like positioning problem, making sure that it's very clear the value that you're bringing to customers.
Are there any specific stakeholders that have to get sign off or give sign off rather to be able to say, okay, this is what we're completely focused on, and how do you sort of defend that at times? Because I think sometimes there's these opinions internally, right, that organizations might come up with because of whatever they've been speaking to internally versus this very thought out, you know data backed messaging that you have come up with as the product marketing manager, right?
Yeah, definitely. We're lucky we have a communications lead on the team who is a really strong writer. So I always like to run any messaging by him, get his feedback, get his sign off. It's not a formal like approval process, but he kind of owns our brand voice. So I like to make sure that he does approve and gives it his stamp of approval, essentially. And then, of course, we make sure we have kind of like if there's a leadership sponsoring the launch or just more involved in the launch, we'll make sure to get their sign off on it as well.
Chris, it's interesting because you have a platform that allows you to test a lot of this stuff, right? What's sort of your process for the development of this messaging positioning?
Yeah, kind of riffing on what Fiona was saying, like the test and iterate part of it's so important in your messaging because let's just be fair, you're probably not going to get it right the first time. And like that's a fair assumption to make with any messaging. And what I like to look for is like you'll get an aha moment with your messaging and it will feel right. And then you'll let that run for a little bit, and then you're probably going to get another one. And it's just going to keep iterating and it's going to smooth out and you're going to feel comfortable at some point. But like we're a pretty small, scrappy team at Centercode, at least on the marketing front. And we don't have as many people to work on that messaging. So we kind of steer in the direction of our users a lot. And I'd like to tell this like real brief story that something I've learned when I ran a test a while ago with a pretty big company, and they were testing out a smart smoker. So they have a smart like pellet grill. So something they would smoke, brisket on or something. And it's smart. So one of the big features on it was that it was Wi-Fi enabled and you can access it from your smartphone. And right when you think of it rationally as a product marketer, we have access to it from anywhere, right? It's like, oh yeah, that's easy marketing messaging, right? It's easier to maintain it and watch it from a distance because you can access it from your phone. But we found some feedback inside the test when we were running it, and someone ran into like, oh man, I love the Wi-Fi feature, it's so cool. And I was running this test, so I kind of poked a little bit more. I have a research mind, so I'm like, why was it important to you? And we got to talking with this user, and she was elaborating. Well, usually when I have to do this, like when I have to make this meal, I got to go back and check on it pretty frequently. So I have to leave my house and I have to go outside and check, and I have to come back in. And she would do that pretty frequently. And she said what it allowed me to do was to spend more time with my family. So she's like, I got to be part of the party a little bit more, right? So like I like to think of it in these two states of like, you have this rational, logical value that your product is providing, like access, ease of use, and then you have like this emotional side of it, and like how we weave that into
Mm,
our stories inside of in marketing can really hit home. So if we're targeting a market that's families, that's cooking, and they want to spend more time with their family, but they don't want to have a bad result at the end of it, it's like that's something that we can kind of work in there.
mm.
So like I've always liked to break out like my value statements in that vein of having that logical and rational and having that like emotional connection with my market, and letting that tell the story a little bit better. So that's one thing that I'd say is a good approach or method to
Chris,
getting us messaging.
Chris, how would you balance? Because I think logical, I think features, very linear. Like, hey, here's what it does, and then I think the emotional as from a perspective of like stories, user stories, maybe, or
Yeah,
maybe stories that touch, um, emotions, as you said. How
yeah,
do you balance both? Because in my mind, it's like you can't be too far on each side, or else it's like stories, but you know,
yeah.
what's the functionality? What is it gonna do, right?
The cool thing when you think about it is marketing messaging isn't always a one and done. Like you're gonna have another message. It could be when they click on something. It could be when they click on an ad, right? So it can start off with something like very emotional to get their attention, and then it could lean into something very rational. Like when you think, I forgot what book I was reading, but they were talking about this, and you need to justify things logically, but you get the attention emotionally. So like if you need to go to your boss and say, "Hey, this is a really cool product," you're not going to go with the emotion of like it's going to make my life easier. You're going to go, "I'm going to be able to save this much more time. I'm going to be able to save, this much money." Like you're going to go that rational route to justify the problem. So like I say you do need to have a mix, but emotion tends to have like an immediate reaction when you're talking to a specific user, and knowing your audience is a little better. And executives may not have that same emotional connection. They may go straight to the logical. Like,
Mm,
what am I going to save with this? Maybe they're having a really tough time with their business. Like, it's we're face it, we're in tough times right now. So, like, certain messaging is going to click right now
mm.
more so than it did, 3 years ago, and it could change in a year. So, like that test and iterate thing. So, that's the balance that I've at least tried to strike, is that you need to know who your user is, test those, make sure that you have a variety of messaging, if they need to go make a decision about your product.
Got it. Fiona, anything you wanted to add there?
No, that's a great story, a great example of I was going to chime in and say messaging and positioning is never done, but Chris took the words out of my mouth. And it's a great, your point about, taking a pulse on where we are as a society and how things have changed, and maybe tweaking any positioning or messaging that you do have to reflect the current day. It's a great reminder.
Yeah, speaking of, messaging and positioning as it relates to sales enablement, right? Like our favorite topic, certainly over here at Asset Meal. I was talking to a CEO who does some fractional um, CRO services, and he's been a salesperson for a long time. He was on our podcast, and he was saying, George, given the existing market, this macro environment, it's no longer enough to just show up and say, hey, here's what we do, and that's it, and buy my tool, right? So like being able to continue to iterate on this messaging, enable the frontline salespeople and CS folks, you know let's just say your CS people are also doing expansions and so on, with those stories, right? With those emotional hooks, but also understanding like, hey, I am speaking to this persona within the organization. Maybe I'm going to use now a more linear, more logical approach. Maybe I'm talking to the CFO. I'm not going to use the feature specific stuff or saving time. It's like, no, we're going to use this story. And so maybe you haven't had that information in the past, right? Because you didn't need to go that deep. Now I think as product marketers and product leaders, we probably have to now expand our kind of toolkit of messaging to be a little more strategic. So as I listen to you both, that's one of the things that sort of stands out to me. Um, in terms of enablement, and then thinking about those assets that you want to start to develop pre-launch, Fiona, how should product marketing approach enablement specifically around like, that product or feature launch, and any best practices that you have seen that really works for you?
Yeah. So I think, one thing at the very highest level, it's important to ensure that your sales team is fully informed around the timing of a launch. The worst thing is when a feature goes live, even if it's a tiny feature update. But if it goes live before the team is fully informed, and impacts anyone demoing the product. So I always like to make sure I have a clear timeline. And I know feature release timelines can change. So I'm still trying to find the sweet spot of when I, give the internal team, the sales team, a expected launch date. But I do find it important for them to have a heads up so we can start working through some of the enablement materials and kind of starting to train the team. So when it comes to actual sales enablement collateral, I like to provide the team with one pagers. That's probably my most frequent request from the team. Just like, how can I get all of the most important information into one page? Which is why I love Asset Mule. It's made that a lot easier, and my team is now very impressed at how pretty they look, because they were just previously just like Notion docs. So one pages are huge. If it's a big release, I'll pull together a pitch deck. And again, depending on the size of the release, I'll accompany the internal enablement with a live in-person demo, or Loom recordings of how to use the feature, and then talk tracks and positioning and messaging. I try and translate that into be like really sales facing. Giving them an understanding of how to communicate this to the prospect or the lead, or whoever they're talking to. And we of course include customer success in those calls as well, because they're the one chatting with existing users. And I think another thing I like to keep in mind is to over communicate around the timing of a launch, or of what the need to knows are to the team. I read somewhere that when you get to the point that you feel like you're annoying someone with how much you're repeating yourself, that's when they are finally starting to listen and grasp, and will remember what you're saying. So I really try and bring that into my product marketing work. I try not to worry about being annoying. I try to worry about not being annoying enough, to make sure that they have all of the information that they need to go out to the customers and sell our product with the new feature in mind.
Awesome. Chris, any sort of like best practices that you've used? I know that right now at Centercode, you're doing a lot of PLG, and there are different sort of stakeholders that are taking deals over the line. Anything that's really standing out that works pretty well right now for you?
Oh yeah, a couple things. I know the launch date is always fun. Like, it's a moving target. Like, let's be fair. I've had a press release and a bunch of materials ready for this last feature release for like a month, but it was in testing and we're fixing it, and it takes a little bit to get through sometimes. One lesson that I've learned that I feel like is helpful, and I feel like I've kind of got it down a little bit here at Centercode, is I was at WD and we were doing a recruitment for a beta test. And it was, we were doing internal testing first. So we were doing some dog fooding, and I had a general manager in there, and he's like, "Hey, I want to get my, my sales leaders, my global sales leaders into the beta test. I'm like, I've always been told not to bring in salespeople into beta test. They're gonna like stop selling what they're selling. This is consumer products, so this is B2C at this point. And they're gonna stop selling what they need to be selling and start thinking about the future, right? And he's like, no, I don't want the individual salespeople. I want the leaders, the sales leaders involved. He said, if they're involved in this test and they get their hands on it, they can like effectively craft a strategy around their region. So they get insights into how to use that product earlier than they would if it was handed to them just before the release date. So they actually get their hands on it. They get to use it. So part of that sales enablement is like product knowledge, like getting familiar with the product and comfortable, because they may have to go demo. They may have to go get in front of people. So in a B2B sense, we may like to include some of our AEs or people that are on the sales team to be able to get into the test, to see what's going on with the test, to be able to learn about the product, give them tasks and instructions to test it out. Sometimes it's a little hard to test B2B products with your internal people. I know that's a thing, but there are creative ways to do it. So I definitely like including salespeople, because I get free training, right? That it's like scale training. Here's how you do it. Here's what you need to be testing. And they can get their feedback in. And that way they also feel like they're getting their voice heard about things that they like or don't like. And that works its way into the product manager being able to make those decisions. And then as far as sales enablement goes, like giving them like actual collateral, it could go a little bit further because they have some knowledge about how the product works. So I get it all the time. We need a one pager for this, this new feature. Everyone wants a freaking one pager. And what's interesting, and we were talking about that like emotional and rational side of it. When you send a one pager, you don't know where it's going, right? It may go to your buyer. Well, you're probably sending it to a user, but it may go to that buyer. It's going to go to other stakeholders. It could end up with procurement for some reason. And they may want to see very logical, rational explanations of why this is beneficial and why they should spend the money. And they have no emotional connection to it. So like you have to think very strategically about who your content is actually built for and where it could be going. Because once you send it, it's gone. And it's in their hands. Could be very powerful if you get it right, but
Yeah, I mean, personalization is huge, right? Like, especially in this environment where we're all remote and for the most part, right? And that multi-threading that's happening behind the scenes, I think it now really, really, really requires that you provide a set of assets that are persona specific, and to your point, are very contextually relevant to that, emotional and logical mind, based on who that persona is, right? And so, again, we've seen this over and over again with CFOs buying products these days, right? And you're going, what the heck does the CFO know, right? But maybe one idea is, and I should say, what the heck does the CFO know about my specific, workflow as let's call it
a user's needs.
Yeah, the user's needs, right? But like a lot of that was thrown out the window, over the last 2 years or so. So, one idea might be having a set of assets, let's call it one pagers, and there's one that's very specific for the CFO, right? And when you're enabling your buyer, that champion internally, being able to point that out, and then also as the product marketers, being able to enable and train our sales team, like, hey, here's the one that we've optimized for that specific persona. And so that's one of the things that I really love about interactive content, right? You have these like digital sales rooms and these sort of things where you can really have everything in one place, but then be able to get that insight from these assets. Nothing against PDFs, I think they've served us for a long time, but this new world just requires a different level of understanding and a different level of dynamic nature of the stuff that we're sending out. So there's some really cool stuff around product demos that have come out, right? Like these technologies out there, like Novatic and Storylane and a bunch of other ones out there, and they provide, I think, pretty cool ways of visually saying, okay, these are the feature sets that this particular persona cares about. Because we all know, like, if we look at the CRM, let me tell you, as a former salesperson, right, I despise using the CRM, right, on a consistent basis. But who buys the CRM, right? It was certainly not the salesperson, right? It was the sales manager. So what product features would I care the most about, right? Um, as a decision maker, as a sales manager, it might be the reporting, right? And those sort of things. And
Yeah.
so being able to segment that, this understanding that we don't have the attention spans, we don't want to send the whole kitchen sink over in a demo. So being able to really segment what we show, and again with these tools or video, using video to be able to like create those experiences. We're actually about to publish a blog post on how to use video and interactive content experiences, UGC, etc., for sales enablement. We typically thought about that as a demand gen kind of thing, right? Like top of the funnel, brand building, etc. But buyers have changed, right? We're all consumers at home, and we really are now, I think, requiring those consumer like experiences within our B2B buying. So it's really cool to see that. And just real quick for the audience out there, go ahead and if you have any questions, go ahead and post it. If you're on LinkedIn, on the comment feed here, and we'll get to them. Justin, thank you so much for your just excitement around this, loving the tip around leveraging outside copywriters. Fiona, I know that's something that you were talking about, to take a pass at the messaging. It's absolutely easy to get stuck in that vacuum, right? And not be able to get that outside perspective, because we might all understand it internally, but externally maybe it's not as clear. So that's a really cool tip. And then of course, the emotional side is makes a lot of sense. We're emotional beings, folks. We just are, right? I mean, I'm hyper emotional, right? So absolutely.
Well, I mean,
Cool.
you get like as a champion, and it's like, so I'll talk about like sales process, right? Like when you get that user that comes through and they feel emotionally attached to your message, they will fight harder with the rational
Yeah.
stuff that goes upwards, right? So like you need to be able to leverage the person that you're selling to help sell internally. So like getting emotional connections, break down some barrier that they're going to start talking to you a little bit more. You get some more insights, and then you give them the ammunition, right? You give them the logical ammunition to say, hey, this is how we're going to sell it internally, because we may not get that meeting with the procurement person
Mm.
or with an exec that needs to sign, the paperwork. So like we need to have we need to build some of that emotional in there.
Absolutely. People do. My dad has always told me this. My dad was he wasn't a salesperson. He was a psychologist, former monk. He was a Franciscan monk who turned psychologist. But he used to always tell me, he was a great salesperson, but again, not technically trained. He'd always say, people do business with people they like, right? And that was it. And it was so simple, right? And I do think that there are situations where you might like someone and then have to choose another solution because of some sort of unemotional thing, right? But you're sure as heck gonna fight for that right person that you like to the end, and they'll be in the discussion or in the consideration, even to the last minute, even if you have to go some other direction. So that truly resonates with me.
Even if they jump companies, right? Like if that's one thing that I've really been hot on, is this like word of mouth and referral. So we could have worked a contact and we could have built a connection. They can go to a new company. They
Yeah.
could bring us into that company as well. Like if you're connected with those, relationships are important, I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. And it's so logical, right? Yet
Yeah.
these are the things that we don't talk a lot about in business school, right? There may be like, you know, some lecture on it, but I think we have to double down on emotional intelligence, and that being way more important than I think it's ever been, just given a lot of different variables. Fiona, if you think real quick about channels, um, and I know it depends, right? The channels you use to actually launch depends on what you've invested in and where you're at as a business and budget and all kinds of stuff. But if you think about maybe some key channels that you would make sure that you would leverage to launch a new product or feature, anything that really stands out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to your point, it definitely depends on the size of the launch. We're working on a new tiering system where we map specific channels to the tier that we assign to the size of the launch. But just in general, some of our go-to channels, in-app messaging is like one of our go-tos right now for features that we definitely want to point out to customers who are in the product right away. Email, either in the form of a dedicated announcement or if it's a smaller launch in our newsletter, giving kind of like a digest of what's new. As an end user, I always like to see that from companies that I use or tools that I use. So that's something that we definitely do. When it makes sense, we play around with social a bit, but it can be tough with feature releases. It's not always the right place to talk about your new feature. And then for our bigger launches, we will sometimes come up with a video campaign and spin up dedicated landing pages on our marketing site for those specifically. Yeah, just to name a few. I feel like I could keep going, but I think those are the big ones.
I know it's all relative. You see people
Yeah.
also doing the building and public stuff that
Yes,
they've
exactly.
done a lot, right? So that's kind of a
Events.
new thing here. Real quick, any sort of tools that you're using, Justin asks, for in-app announcements?
We use Intercom.
Okay,
hmm
cool.
Yeah, we've had success with that. It's been doing the job for us right now.
Awesome. Cool. Chris, anything that you're using for in-app announcements?
We have HubSpot.
Cool.
So we use HubSpot chats. We have our own built in-app messaging. And then I think like what Fiona was saying, like it's not necessarily in-app, but to users. So we have our newsletter that goes out to users, and we have our release notes section and all that stuff. We do like to hit socials because a lot of our customers follow socials.
Fantastic. Well, let's move on to, okay, we've launched, right? We're looking back, we're drinking our margaritas and pina coladas on the beach, and we're thinking about, oh boy, we got to get back next week and start to track performance and continue testing. Because I think that's one of the interesting things, Chris, that you shed a lot of light on, from a solution that, of course, that's what y'all do. But beta testing doesn't stop, right? Testing doesn't stop. Like, it's ongoing. A lot of the time, as founders or startups, we think a lot about like the launch and the beta, and is that thing that you do when you launch the business early on. Of course, I've spent most of my career launching things, um, but it's not, right. You continue to iterate, you continue to test. What kind of testing do you see, or do you recommend to folks out there? And then also adding enablement, right? Because with those new insights requires continuing to enable your sales and marketing teams. And then lastly, any sort of like performance assessments that you do after the fact. And is there like a fixed schedule, or is that just something that you kind of do in perpetuity?
Yeah, we definitely monitor regularly, right? So we have all our metrics, our dashboards, everything's telling us what's going on. So once we launch something, we can kind of keep an eyes on it. But it really depends on what that launch is for. I mean, the cop out to every question ever is like, it depends. But if we're looking at a feature that's really targeted to our existing user base, and we're looking for adoption, we want to hit adoption because we feel like it's going to make the user a little stickier, like they're gonna stay around longer. Or if it's a quality of life improvement, like we're going to have way different messaging for a quality of life improvement, far fewer things and very personal things. Like it's like, yeah, we updated this, so it's not slow anymore or something like that. A new feature targeted to existing users, and then a new feature targeted to getting new users is going to have different messaging as well. But what's important is that you have channels for collecting feedback, just like we have channels for going out, right? We're going to have channels for what we hit on, a new release, but we're going to have channels like you're going to have support. You're going to have probably surveys going out to people. You could have your net promoter scores or CSAT surveys. I like to have beta programs. So when you think of like Apple iOS, like they always have a beta program going. They always have the next thing that they're testing and features. And the state of it is most companies are releasing regularly, whether or not it's weekly or every 2 weeks or monthly or once a quarter or something like that. And it's important to make sure that we get that feedback from users, because we're gonna relaunch the next thing, right? We're gonna tweak the previous thing that we just got feedback on. So when we talked about like your messaging is never really finished, it's like using a program that you have access to users is going to be important, because it's not always going to happen just from the survey. The survey can give you something like a snapshot in time, but a bigger beta program is continuous. It's always flowing, coming in and out. So like they're going to react to what you're pushing out there, the way your product is working, especially reacting to the environment that we talked about. So like that's really key. Is times change. We went remote in an instant, right? Like it all just like happened over a couple months, and now everyone's opinion's different about what's going on, what's important to them. Later, in a year after the pandemic, businesses got hit pretty hard because people were all, there's layoffs, there's hiring freezes and budget freezes and all that stuff. People change, right? They're looking for new positions. I forgot what it was called, the Great Resignation. Like that was going on, and everyone was looking for a new job, and then all of a sudden everyone's laid off again. So I think it's really important to have a constant pulse, and you need to have those multiple channels. And that's really going to help you continuous sales enablement and continuous product improvement. So that's what I'd say.
Awesome. Fiona, how about yourself? Specifically from your perspective as a product marketer.
Yeah. As a product marketer, kind of sitting at the intersection of so many teams, I like to, define KPIs early on that don't just, ideally they will level up to our highest business goals, but I like to identify and choose KPIs that apply to several different teams. So keep an eye on product metrics, marketing metrics, and also sales. So looking at, on the product side, adoption rate, usage; on marketing, like leads or CAC; and then in sales, thinking about revenue or time to close or pipeline. And then, beyond metrics, like to the point about user feedback, just kind of like, making sure that you're taking the time to conduct, post launch surveys with customers to gather feedback, make sure that the feature is resonating with them. I like to also just keep an eye on some of the customer support tickets that come in that might mention the feature. If there's a lot of confusion around it, it might mean that we're not messaging or positioning it correctly. So that's kind of like something I use as like a quick pulse check to just like, pay special attention to. And then just continuing to collaborate with, product team to, take a look at any technical issues, bugs coming up that we might need to address. And then, I think those are like the main ways that I think about, analyzing the performance surrounding a launch.
Awesome. Chris, Fiona, thank you so much for being just on this session here today and sharing your insights. Very, very much appreciated. For folks out there, thank you for attending. Definitely check out Centercode. Chris, maybe you can give us another just sort of like quick 10-second or so on Centercode, just for the folks out there, because a lot of what we talked about here today can absolutely be executed on Centercode.
Yeah, definitely. We have a free product. So we just introduced our PLG version of our product in March timeframe. So go to centercode.com. You can sign up for a free version. What allows you to do is bring in users. You can collect their feedback. It could be issues, ideas, things they like, praise. So that's the testimonials, that other user generate content. And then allows you to kind of look at that data and say what's working, what's not working. You can give tasks to users. Here's what I'd like you to go test or experience. And I guess that's a quick 30-second version of it.
Awesome. Fiona, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, but AIR is a creative operations platform that helps teams manage all of their digital assets in one visual first workspace, essentially. And yeah, we have a free version as well. So definitely would encourage you to jump in and try it out. It's a great, I mean, beyond just for teams, it's a great way to organize your personal, digital files, photos, videos. So always encourage anyone to check it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. And for folks out there, uh, just have to say, Asset Mule is in private beta. So if anyone is a product marketer out there, or maybe you're on the sales team and want to understand a little bit more about what we do, feel free to reach out, and we'll hook you up. And again, thank you so much, Fiona and Chris, for being on this session here today. And have a wonderful day.